Good morning, middle school. Let me make this bigger. There we go. It is February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day. And today we are going to continue our series called Do Something. We started this last week when we were together. So we're going to keep it going this week and then we'll continue it next week. I think we've got 4 weeks total. So 2 more weeks after this. But here we go. Do something. So today I want to talk about something that is super vivid, sticks out in my memory of a time that I experienced injustice. And it was, I would have been a little bit younger than you guys, or quite a bit, some of you, the eighth graders. I think it was fifth grade. And so this is when I still had recess. And I remember vividly walking from the cafeteria to like the classroom to put my lunchbox so I could go to recess. And there was a group of kids around me and they were being like wild and rambunctious and just annoying and just not behaving how they should be. And I am like a total rule follower. So I was not a part of that. I was like, ooh, not, but I was close enough to it that when a teacher came around the corner and like had heard all that noise, said, all of you need to go on the wall, which sounds like such a ridiculous punishment, but maybe you can relate. The wall was during recess. Instead of getting to go play, you had to stand on the wall of the school, like the brick wall, and stand there and, be sad and be punished for however long it was. And so it was only like 5 minutes or something. Like it was not even a big deal, but I was just irate because I had done nothing to deserve it. And I thought that it was so unjust that I would have to be punished for something that I did not do. So I don't know if you've ever experienced anything like what I just shared, but in my experience, it was totally unfair. It was totally unjust, and I knew that what me being punished wasn't right. Um, and that's what we're talking about today. We're in this series called Do Something, and we're talking about injustice. And we've talked about how injustice are those things in the world that are unfair, unequal, just not right. So when we see someone being bullied at school because of how they look or how they talk, that's an injustice. When assumptions are made about someone based on the color of their skin, that's an injustice. When there are students who go to sleep hungry or don't have enough to eat, that is an injustice. So, um, any of those things that we see in the world where there's just something is unfair, that is injustice. And injustices are the kinds of things that when they happen, it makes us stop and go, hold on, like this is not right. This is not what God intended. Somebody needs to do something about that. So, some of us know about injustice because we've seen it. Some of us know about injustice because we've heard about it. And others of us, we know about injustice because we've actually experienced it, right? So maybe that is you. Maybe you're in that boat where you have experienced injustice. Oops, sorry. And so we need to see injustice before, like our lesson last week was that we need to be able to see injustice before we can do anything about it. That's great and all, but if we are living in injustice or if we are experiencing injustice that's happening to us, what are we supposed to do? So that's the question we have to ask. And for some of us in the room, injustice isn't something that happens to somebody else, it's something we personally are experiencing. So um, no matter what injustice you have experienced, how unfair and painful and hurtful it is, you are not alone. And we have all experienced injustice in one way or another. And if you haven't, that's really such a blessing. And to be able to be in a position where you get to understand it is really, really great. So, part of doing something about injustice is learning to see it and listening to those who have experienced it. So, taking on the way that God cares and has compassion for those who are experiencing injustice, that is something that we can all do. So, to help us do that, we're going to look at a real experience from a real person who has experienced injustice. So maybe you can relate to this, and it probably, anytime you hear about injustice, has you thinking like, what do I do about injustice when it's happening to me, not just like around me? So, before diving into a Bible story, I want you to know that like you really do not deserve the injustice that you've experienced. All the way back in the beginning when God created Adam and Eve, um, God tells us that we as humans have value because we're made in his image. And we might not be able to see God to know what he looks like, but we're created by him to show others more of who he is. So, because of that, you have value and nothing will ever change that. You were made to be treated with respect, and it's not your fault that you were born into a broken world with rules, traditions, and ideas about people. Any injustices that you've experienced, they say a lot more about the brokenness and hurt of the people who are putting you into those situations than it does about you. So, that being said, we're going to take a look at some people who experienced injustice together. And we are going to look at a guy named Nebuchadnezzar. What a name. He was a king in ancient times and he was kind of crazy. He was super powerful. He had conquered and captured all of God's people. And he was very much used to getting his way. Whatever he said happened. He said jump, people said how high. So he was used to getting his way. And he decided that they should build a giant golden statue that stood 90 feet tall. And then he ordered that everyone around would have to bow down and worship the statue whenever they heard like a specific music playing. And if they didn't, they would be thrown into the blazing fire, which is a lot and very like just a guy that, has to get his way, right? And there at the time there were three Jewish leaders named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Or if you are the VeggieTales aficionado, you might remember Shadrach and Benny. So this is their story. They worshipped God, and because of that, they did not want to bow down to this statue and worship this other like statue, not even a god, right? So they didn't want to bow down and worship the statue. And good for them, right? Like that is so awesome. But people who were loyal to Nebuchadnezzar saw them not bowing down, not worshiping the statue, and they had other things to say. They plotted against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they basically just snitched to the king, said, hey, they're not worshiping. So you can probably guess the king was not thrilled by that news, right? He said, hey, this is what you need to do, and someone disobeyed him. So the author of the book of the Bible where the story is found actually wrote down that in a furious rage, the king ordered that Shadrach and Benny be captured. He gave them one more chance to bow down and worship when the music played, or they'd be thrown into the fire. But even in the face of that punishment, these guys stood their ground. Sorry. Okay. So, of course, this made the king very upset, and he ordered that they be thrown into the fire. So, just like that, Shadrach and Benny, they were tied up, they were thrown in super hot flames. The soldiers who actually were the ones who threw them into the fire, they died from the heat. It was so hot, which is crazy to think about, right? And we can all agree that that situation is totally unfair. Shadrach and Benny, what they did, it was unfair that their punishment be that they are thrown into the fire, and it certainly was not something they deserved. So what ended up happening? So let's actually read this passage. So we are going to go to Daniel, the book of Daniel, and we're in chapter 3, verses 24 to 27. And it starts like this. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace? Yes, your majesty, we certainly did, they replied. Look, Nebuchadnezzar shouted. I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god. Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their head was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. Now, we're not entirely sure who was in the fire with the men. Like, was it God? Was it Jesus? Was it an angel? We don't know. But one thing is very clear here is that God did not allow them to be alone in that situation. He did not leave them in the fire to burn by themselves. He didn't let them suffer or experience that injustice by themselves. And that's a huge deal because it shows us the same thing that is true for us, that we don't have to experience that injustice alone. In other words, when you experience injustice, you don't have to face it alone. You are never alone when you face injustice. In fact, Jesus demonstrated that when he came to earth. He came to be God here with us. He could have come as a king or some powerful person, some big like warrior, but instead he came to the world as a baby. He came as a person who would experience all the things that we've experienced, including injustice. So scripture tells us that he understands how we feel when we're treated unfairly, and he stands with us in it. He goes into the fires of injustice right beside us so that we don't have to do it alone. So when you are experiencing injustice, you do not have to face that alone. So the story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is just really great. Taking a closer look, every person in it gives us a different view of what injustice may look like, right? Maybe you can totally relate to the three guys in the fire because you experience the suffering that goes along with injustice. Maybe you're experiencing right now. And if that's you, I want you to remember just a couple things, right? Number one is just to know that God's with you. He hears you, He made you in His image. And that means that no matter what injustice you experiencing, you have value and worth and you deserve respect. And God does not want you to walk through what you're experiencing alone. Um, and also to share what you're experiencing. If you're experiencing right now, or if you're dealing with an justice that's happened to you in the past, like just know that this is a safe place. You can process that. Please text us. Let us know what's going on. We want to pray for you. We want to help you. Um, and it can be just really powerful to be able to share that with an adult or share that in prayer with God. Like share what you've experienced. That can be a huge step just to get some guidance and some support and some prayer and some love. Um, and, we can be those people that, God has sent into your life to stand with you through that fire of injustice. And then the last step is just keep going, right? The guys in the fire never stood down. They didn't give up. And I don't want you to either. If you are experiencing an injustice, I want you to do something. And maybe that something is just opening up to an adult, sharing that injustice. Maybe it is standing up for yourself or creating a group of friends to brainstorm on how you can make a positive change. And maybe it's something like joining an organization that's already working against that injustice, like whatever it is, taking that step. So, of course, there is another character in the story, King Nebuchadnezzar, and none of you are throwing people into fires because they aren't going to worship your statue, right? Hopefully not, right? But I think there may have been times that if we're really honest, we can admit that we have participated in an injustice in some way. And maybe we're more like the people in the crowd who kind of just watch the injustice. We don't speak up or speak out. So whether you are the person, pushing the injustice forward, or you're someone who's just kind of watching, whether that's laughing along when your buddy makes a joke or standing back when someone's getting bullied, listening to music that is disrespectful towards certain genders or certain races, allowing other people to take the blame for your mistakes, making fun of someone who doesn't have a lot of friends. Like, if that's you, you can change, right? If you're kind of stepping back and letting things happen, you can change. And maybe the best step that you can take against injustice is to make the change to be the person who does not contribute to injustice. And that's something to really talk to God about. You can ask him to help you see the places where you are contributing to injustice so that you can fix that and take steps to correct it and just like do better when it comes to injustice. So that's definitely something that like I think prayer can really help with. So remember, a very important key when you experience injustice, if you are going through that, you don't have to face that alone. And that's also part of why we meet here. Just, you have friends at church who are with you, and you also have us leaders who want to stand with you and pray with you and work through these things with you. We are for you. We are praying with you. We are learning from you. We want to encourage you. And this is kind of tricky. Like, this is pretty personal. Injustice can be really hard. So, again, just the biggest piece there that when you're going through this injustice, understanding that you are not alone and that we are with you. We want to help you as much as you can, and God is with you. And Jesus understands what injustice feels like. So, moving into the questions in the details below, you can see them. there are some questions there to, journal about or to talk to a parent about. One question that you can think of as we're wrapping this up is, what is an injustice that you have experienced or maybe someone you know has experienced? Please feel free to text that to us. Like, if you've got my number, go ahead, shoot me a text. Let me know what is an injustice that you have experienced. I'd love to process that with you. If you don't have my number, your parents all do. So talk to them about it. You can send me a message and let me know what's going on. So that's it for this week. There are questions in the details below. Feel free to journal them, talk to a parent, whatever helps you process best. And we will be back next week. And that will be, oh, it'll still be February. Sorry, February 21st. So we'll see you February 21st. And until then, stay safe and we'll see you then. Bye, guys.